Hi everyone, welcome to the Literary Translation Centre. I'm just going to introduce ourselves. As we were just saying, we're so economical, we don't need a chair. This is Alexandra Buchler, who's the Director of Literature Across Frontiers. And I am Alice Guthrie, I'm a freelance translator and researcher for Literature Across Frontiers. So it's nice to see so many people. Welcome everyone. We're here today to talk about how much world literature matters to us in the UK, or indeed does it matter to us. And so first of all, I just wanted to make clear that we're doing something slightly different with our session actually. We wanted it to be a kind of consultation session with you, the audience, really, because we're about to embark on, we've embarked on a big new bit of research, and we would really like to get your input and feedback, and that'll become apparent as we move on. So we're going to try and be quite brief and then open up about halfway through to you guys for lots of interesting pointers and questions and discussion. So get thinking, and please stick your hand up at any point if you want to. So if we're talking about world literature in the UK, we're really talking about two things, aren't we? We're in the quite unusual position of being able to read lots and lots of world literature that was written in English in the Anglophone world. So if we're talking about world literature here, we're either talking about that or we're talking about stuff in translation. So with the literature that's written in English, we have a bit more of an idea, really, of whether or not that matters to us in the UK. And the answer is, and of course I don't have stats, this is going to be a recurring theme of the presentation, the ghostly stat, the absence of the stat in the UK scene. But we all kind of anecdotally feel quite confident that in the UK we do read kind of foreign literature written in English, and in fact this phenomenon can be argued that it lessens our intake of translated literature, because sort of the old truism is that, you know, if we want to get something a bit exotic or a bit foreign, then we can go read Salman Rushdie or whoever. But at least we kind of know that we're reading that stuff, right? We can all think of examples of it. And I think that's quite an interesting side topic, actually, the sort of UK tradition of having cosily mediated foreign stories that are written in English, because I think it's quite interesting to even think about authors like Louis de Bernier. I just wanted to throw in this question, whether anyone in the audience can tell me now or later whether anyone has an example of a writer like that in another language who kind of tells foreign stories in this very mediated way for a domestic audience in their language, and you could say appropriates them or whatever. So I think of that as a peculiarly UK Anglophone, you could say insular tradition. That's an aside. So I feel like it's easier to say with some confidence, well, you know, we quite like world literature written in English. But what about translated literature? Traditionally, it is really hard to tell in the UK how translated literature is really received. We know that we have a lot less literature in translation here, as we're always hearing on these panels and elsewhere. It's completely different to the situation in most other European countries, and it's a really unique situation. And we often hear sort of certain percentages bandied around about what that quantity might be. But we don't really know what the numbers are, and in general people don't really know where to start to say, actually, how does the UK reading public feel about translated literature? There's lots of anecdotal stuff about it, but it's all quite contested, and we don't really know what the indicators are. One seemingly really strong indicator, of course.
Taking flight.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's lots of great studies and work going on.
Yeah.
But one thing that some of us are concerned about is trying to tease out and unpick this kind of big buzz around literary translation. I'm just sitting in this weird position because I've got an injured foot and I'm trying to get attention. Trying to sort of tease out this real buzz around literary translation, which is represented by wonderful events like this, among other things. So over the last sort of 3 to 5 years or so in the UK, we've seen this quite amazing blossoming of the visibility of translation, of literary translation, really. So that there's some great new venues and events, and this place here has been established, and more translation content in events and so on. But I think sometimes we have to be quite careful, because that can create a situation where in this kind of bubble we're thinking that it's all fine and that translation's really taking off and everything, and it would be really interesting to get some solid numbers, is what we were thinking. So is more stuff being actually published in translation in the UK? And if so, is it more being sold? And is it being read? Because we kind of know it's being talked about, but I'm a translator, and then when I talk to people who aren't translators about it, I think, yeah, do you actually know that we think we've got this big whole scene? So it's been kind of Laf's dream for quite some time, I think, to get some statistics about this. And, shame on us in the UK, really. We just don't have our numbers. We just don't know what's going on. So I'm going to hand over to Alexandra now, who's going to tell us something about the kind of crazy data trail of the data detectives in the attempt to actually answer some of these questions with big, hard numbers.
Thank you, Alice. That was a good introduction. And whenever I talk about this discussion we're having as translators or about translation, I always mention how when I talk to people who are outside this field, really sometimes when people ask me, what do you do? And I say, I'm a translator, it's a conversation stopper. They don't know what to say, what to ask. They say, how many languages do you translate from, for example? So it's that sort of context we're working in. We know what we're talking about when we talk to each other, but what does it all mean out there to the general reader? So Alice mentioned the research that we have embarked on, and we have actually been looking at translation flows and also the kind of context in which translation happens across Europe, and we have published some reports which you can find on a temporary website. By the way, I wanted to also wave these around and tell you that our stand is just behind this wall, so you can go and pick up some material about what Literature Across Frontiers does. And we are actually redeveloping our website. So at the moment we have several websites, and one of them is called LAF Publications, LAF Publications, all one word, .org. And that's where you will find some of the reports we have produced so far. One of them looks at the publishing of translations across Europe in over a period of 15 years. And what's interesting about that is that you get a lot of statistics, and the statistics, the whole survey is actually based on Index Translationum. I suppose all of you know what that is, and you also know how...
Possibly not, no?
Sorry?
Could you say quickly what it is? Some people might not know.
Is there anyone who doesn't know what Index Translationum is?
Oh,
goodness. Okay. I'm making assumptions. So Index Translationum is a world database of translations, which has been, of published translations, which has been actually managed by UNESCO. It goes back to 1939. It was produced, I remember as a student, I used to go and visit the stacks in the library, in the university library, and look at these tomes of, the printed world bibliography, and I thought it was amazing. But then UNESCO started putting this online, and now there is a database. So if you go to Google and you put in Index Translationum UNESCO, you will get to this database, which is pretty amazing, and it's the only one we have. This is really where we can find some information about translations being published around the world. Now, when you start kind of zooming in onto what happens in Britain, suddenly you realize that there's really not that much there. And why is that? Because in the UK we have not been collecting statistics about the publishing of translated books. And this is quite unique. Every other country in Europe does it. Every other country has an institution which is charged with the duty to actually collect these statistics, except for the UK. This is pretty amazing, and I don't know who to blame, but the data is there. It's just that no one has been somehow interested enough to really say, okay, national British Bibliography, or sorry, British National Bibliography or British Library should be doing this. So what happened some years ago was that that UNESCO actually signed an agreement with the British National Library to receive the data that is available and to put it in this bibliography. But not much has happened. They have been doing it. I suppose they're short-staffed like everyone else these days. And so what we have now is we have the data which is out there and nobody has been analyzing it. We have a kind of stream of data going to Paris, to UNESCO, and we still don't have any outcomes. So we thought, well, let's actually get in there, and somebody has to do it. And we were lucky enough to actually receive funding from the from Arts Council England and from the Gulbenkian Foundation, and I would like to thank them. I don't know if they're represented here, but big thanks. And so these two bodies, I mean, the Arts Council and the private foundation, Gulbenkian Foundation, has actually put some money towards a research that we have embarked on. And we're trying to do two things. One is we're trying to look at the whole wider environment of what happens around translation and around the reception of publication and reception of international writing in the UK. And on the other hand, we're actually trying to collect statistics and process them and analyze them. Now, if I asked you how many books or what's the percentage of books in translation published in the UK, would you have the answer, or is there 3%? Yes? 1.5. Where do you get that from? Yeah. Well, for years I have been saying we don't know the answer. We use this 3% figure, which actually is probably quite high. And we don't know because no one has really bothered to collect these statistics. So what we did was we really started looking, first of all, at the data trail. And I won't bore you too much with it, but basically we looked at how is the data recorded and collected and where does it go from where, etc. Essentially, what we discovered is that there is the British Library and 5 copyright libraries in the UK, for instance, the National Library of Wales, etc. So there are several libraries that collect this data. There is the legal deposit, whereby publishers are obliged to deposit books in libraries, so every published book should be deposited there. And then there's the Nielsen Book Data Service, where publishers have an option of subscribing to different sort of levels of service. Obviously, the more detailed one is costs, etc. So what we're looking at is a situation where publishers really are the first ones who are responsible for giving the data further and recording all the data. So that means really what we need is the original title, language of the original, name of the translator, etc., etc. So we need to know all this data to be able to track the translations. Now we spoke to the British Library, and they very, very kindly agreed to actually collect some data for us for 3 sample years. And what we came up with is we actually now know how many translations in the literary field, and again we're looking at, I see you shaking your head, what's the problem?
wait for the microphone.
Wait for the microphone, yes.
Although all publishers in this, just on that little
Yeah.
point, all
Yeah.
publishers in this country are meant to deposit books.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been doing bibliographic research into translation for 25, 30 years, and I know that the British Library do not have every book. They simply
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
They simply don't.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there are a number of books that slip through, don't
Yes.
get there,
Yes.
and so that does affect it.
I absolutely
I
agree.
think that's-
absolutely agree.
that's one
And
of our
this
key
is this is
points,
the
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
this is the kind of discussion we would like to have here,
Okay.
because
So,
really what we have now is we have a database with UNESCO. We have the data that the British Library has, and we know that there is more out there. And partly why that's the case is that translation. Literature in translation is published by very small publishers, by independent publishers who sometimes simply do not have the resources to, give the data, to fill in forms, etc., etc. And I mean, why they don't make the legal deposit, I'm not quite sure. Maybe you have an answer to that. But I think it all boils down, at least partly, to the problem that you often have publishers who have, I don't know, 2 staff, or a small number of staff. So
There's
essentially,
and there's also the problem with with the British National Bibliography. Thank you. As we discovered that it's often also the pre-publication notice or whatever it's called goes to them, doesn't it? And then things get shelved, and so there's also extra books in there. Not only books missing, but books that don't exist are in there. So it's kind of skewed in both directions. Which is what we're talking about it being like the invisible stat. You can't really get it from anywhere so far.
But I suppose this would be the situation in every country. You always have the odd publisher who doesn't sort of do that. So I think we all know how slippery statistics can be, but still we need them. We really need to know at least what the numbers that we can get are. And so we looked, and it's very laborious. It's very, as you know, because you have been doing it, Stephen. So we asked for data, and we actually said this is how we define literary translations: fiction, poetry, a certain type of memoir, children's books, and really that's it. And we asked for the data and then trailed through them and came up with the following figures. In the year 2000, 599 translations in this category. In the year 2005, 843. And in the year 2008, 974, which is quite an increase. Now, is it that there has been an increase of published translations? Is it that publishers have been more diligent in reporting and making the legal deposit? Again, we don't know, and it's really difficult to to get exact figures. But I think this does show us something, and I think the good news is that there seems to be an increase. So that's what I would say. Then, when we look at the total figures, of course, this is a very, very, very small percentage. So that's really the outcomes that we have, the outputs that we have so far from this research. We have discussed with the British Library that we would like to work with them on somehow establishing a mechanism to collect this data and analyze it. And this is really what this study has been about, to identify an optimal mechanism for collecting data on translation. So enough on that, and now let's turn to the wider survey that we are embarking on. Do you want to continue?
So that's some of the statistical stuff and how far we've got. And I think that just goes to prove really how much further we'd like to be able to get and more precise. And it'd be amazing if we could really know what percentages of the whole of literary publication in general, so we could really know what we're talking about. Incidentally, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't the 3% that is bandied around come from the famous US 3%?
Well,
or does it come from something more
It
subtle?
is, I think it is a figure that has been kind of used generally
Yeah.
both in the US and in the UK, and this is maybe something I should also mention. What makes this kind of research even more difficult is the situation of the English language book market. And so when you're actually looking at the data in the British Library or the National Bibliography, you actually realize that the records include books that were definitely published in the United States, but they're distributed here and they're treated as UK published books. We came against this problem when with Alice we produced a study of literary translation from three languages outside the EU, Arabic, Hebrew and Turkish, and into English in the UK, and we produced a bibliography for each of these languages. It was again a very complicated task, but what we came up with was that actually, for instance, publications by the American University of Cairo Press, based in Cairo, are recorded in the bibliography as if they were published in the UK. I mean, it says where they were published, but because they're distributed here, they count as a UK publication, and that really changes the whole picture, because you have a situation where you end up with, let's say, 300 publications over a period of time, but then you realize that actually 100 of them, one whole third, is published by a single publisher based outside this country. So these are the further complications.
Yeah, and other US publishers as well. I mean, in the end, we took for that research that line that some librarians and academic librarians take, which is that if it's as freely available as a UK book, then it is a UK book, and if it's in the British National Bibliography, then it's a UK book. So that's okay if you're talking about certain aspects of the market and so on, but does it still count if you're talking about how likely people are to have heard about the book and subtle nuances like that? So it becomes like drawing lines in the sand, really, to try and work out, what you count and what you don't count, which is yet another, makes the figures even more arbitrary and so on.
So can I just say something? So when you go to our website, you will also see that what we have been really focusing on is the whole area of public policy and how that sort of intervenes in the market, and especially in the translation market. So we have been looking at how translation is supported across Europe, and as you probably all know, most of you being translators, translations are supported by the national organizations which provide translation grants to foreign publishers to publish their literature in translation. Now, so that's one area we have been looking at, and we have been trying to really analyze quite closely how this whole work of these organizations happens, how they promote literature, what kind of tools they use. There was a session at the beginning of the program here on Monday morning about resources on national literatures for publishers, and it was a very interesting session where the publications that are produced by these organizations were reviewed by a couple of publishers in the UK. So these organizations don't just give grants for translation, they promote literature, they provide information about new titles, they support authors to travel abroad, etc. So that's the kind of public policy side, and of course there are some private foundations that also contribute to this. So what we have been really looking at quite closely has been the support for the supply side, and I think what we sort of need to stop now and look at what happens on the demand side, what happens for instance, to all these subsidized books that have been published. Are they still in print? How long are they on shelves in bookshops, etc.? So, and do they sell? What needs to be done maybe for them to sell more, etc., etc. So these are really the questions that we would like to be asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to pin down this kind of slippery subject because obviously, if those figures are anywhere near accurate, and there's been an almost twofold increase in translated literature being published in the last 8 years, then that's great. That's great. But what is, what if we unpick that a bit? What also is hidden within those statistics? So yeah, like Alexandra just mentioned, the concerns about heavily subsidised literature and where it goes and so on. And also, we haven't got clear statistical data about how much is selling and, let alone how much is being read and all of that. And one of the things that I wanted to do for the research that we've embarked on was to really look closely at library borrowing statistics for translated literature. And they don't exist. So we can talk anecdotally, we can do case studies, and that's something that we're in the process of doing, and that's going to be really interesting when that's finished, a case study of an inner city library, a case study of a small town library. But that's not really, is it, what we're really looking for? It would be great to be able to say X percent was borrowed. But if we look at the public lending right, so the authority, I don't know if everyone knows what that is, but the authority that gives authors the royalties for their books being borrowed from the library, they can tell you what the top 100 most borrowed books are, but they can't tell you, there's no breakdown. And they do certain other categories, but there isn't a breakdown of translation. So obviously in that top 100, Stieg Larsson's in there. But yeah, it's not very rich data, that. So really looking at readers and has kind of been quite neglected, and is something that that we need to look at more clearly, because I guess, and I'm going to wrap up now so that we can get into the questions, but I guess something that I wanted to really stress was that, we can kind of we could probably get in, a lot of us could get into for all day talking about, is it the sort of supply side, like if you're going to talk about blame, is it the supply side or the demand side? So is it all of the terrible stuff we know about the commercial imperative in publishing and the market squeezing the arts ever tighter and the cuts massacre and so on, editorial choices? Or is it the demand side? So is it, cultural insularity and English being the lingua franca, or these kind of lazy readers, or whatever, the different things that... slurs that are kind of slung around. And I suppose one of my questions that I really like to put to you lot is kind of, one, do we need to identify that? Do we need to have that worked out before we can work out what needs to be done? And is it one or the other, or is it kind of all part of the same thing? Is it a binary? And more to the point, how can we tackle really both sides? And what initiatives would tackle both or just one side? What are the good examples of ways that the profile of translation can be, really ways that it can be read more? Not to put too fine a point on it. What are we asking for and what are we looking for? So that and everything else we've covered and anything else that you'd like to raise, I would suggest that we... have a wider chat than us two on the stage now. If you
before we do that, I would like to mention 2 surveys that we've just completed.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
And it's okay. I should have 2 surveys that we just completed, and you will be able to find them in about 2 weeks on this website I mentioned. And they are actually repeats of surveys that we have done before, and they're complementary in the sense that we have surveyed the organizations that provide translation grants and support translation. On the one hand, so we have asked them all sorts of questions about their policy and how they work and how much they spend, which is quite interesting because the spending goes from, 20,000 euros to 500,000 on grants. So there's quite a great range of possibilities that these organizations and resources that these organizations have. And on the other hand, we have actually surveyed publishers across Europe, and we have asked them how they select titles, how they find out about interesting titles that they would like to publish in translation, what their relationship is with the organizations that provide grants, have they had grants both from the national organizations and from Europe. And all sorts of questions like that. What are the difficulties in publishing translations? And I have to say that one of the things that comes to mind when you just said what you said about the supply and the demand side is that it's quite clear that the supply side is supported reasonably well. We could always do with more money for translation, that's for sure. But from what we gathered, the organizations that provide the support really are working quite well, and they're doing what they can to support publishers in doing their job. So when you ask publishers what is the greatest difficulty in actually dealing with translation, the answer that came up, and we gave them a kind of multiple choice to choose from, and they could obviously tick more boxes than one. The greatest difficulty is to sell the books. So it's marketing, it's selling, it's getting the readers to read them. So I just wanted to flag that up because it's really something that kind of keeps coming up. And that's what publishers say. You know, when we look at the economics of translation, it costs more to produce a translation, but it's more difficult to sell them because you're dealing with authors who may not be well known or not at all known. You have the extra cost of translation, etc. We all know about this. So how can we really develop reading of translations, and what are we up against? Are we up against a decline in reading on the whole? Are we up against really a climate of cultural indifference, which was an expression used in an earlier panel here? So let's now open the floor to questions, and let's see what your views are.
We're waiting for your input.
Silence.
Otherwise our report can't happen.
Anybody has a question? Anybody has a comment?
Oh, I was hoping for one each.
But
can you just wait for the mic?
Yeah.
And then if you feel like introducing yourself. No. Okay. Incognito.
I'm Lucy from Book Trust. I was just interested if you thought that the massive success of Stieg Larsson and Umberto Eco from a sort of longer perspective, whether that in a way got translated fiction in a little niche that people only saw it in I'm talking about readers as a whole, basically that people are buying those books, but is it not necessarily broadening people's knowledge of the wide variety of what may be out there? So basically to try and does a bestseller, do you feel that that's helpful about raising awareness, or does it ghettoize translated fiction?
I don't know if it ghettoizes it, but I don't know if people, I'd be fascinated to hear what people think about this, because I'm not an expert, but I don't know if people really identify that as even translated, do they? I mean, when you see adverts on the side of buses in London for the new film version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo or whatever, do people look and think, oh look, it's an advert on a bus for a film based on a translated book? Most people... Yeah. And also, I don't know...
It is, and you're talking about a remake, actually, an American remake of a film, which people can see with subtitles, but they don't want to do that.
Yeah, and I remember when I was researching the Arabic to English report, and I remember Ra Page from Commerce saying, Stieg Larsson's like a super freak. You can't use that example. You can't sort of think of it in the same category. And I think that would be my hunch, actually, would be to go... Yeah, I think they might be, but what does everyone... I also kind of... My hunch is that that's because of the cultural fascination with violence we've got, and that we're all so exhausted. The only thing that can hold our attention is like terror, and then when you see all those adverts for the terror books in the station, the fact that one of them's translated is not neither here nor there. But what do people think? And I don't know.
Well, What I can say is that one of the reports I mentioned earlier, which is one was about about translation from Arabic, another one was about literary translation from Turkish, and the conclusion of that report was that actually the fame of Orhan Pamuk and the fact that he received the Nobel Prize actually has not really opened the way for other Turkish authors. So that would be my answer. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually that those super freaks, if you like, that those superstar ones...
Freaks.
I like that expression. That those superstars, let's say then, can actually... It means that, no one's ever going to... you could argue that no one's ever going to read anything else translated from Turkish other than Orhan Pamuk or whatever. So it's just like, we've got our one author, which is almost not that far removed from the kind of like reading Salman Rushdie instead of reading something translated from the subcontinent or something. But what do people think? There's a question behind you.
Yeah, this is a question. Given the fact that when you see a book on the shelves in a bookshop, you've got the cover, the title, and the author's name, and the only thing which is going to be foreign is the author's name, do you think that it's simply a foreign name which puts people off buying the book? Because there are plenty of new writers out there with Anglo-Saxon names, and I assume that they don't get left back on the shelf.
Well, again, this is something that's debated, and I think one of the answers to that question, why we read so few translations in the UK, is that we're kind of self-sufficient. I mean, I shouldn't be saying we because I'm not British myself, but
share the blame, go on.
the one of the answers is we get all that variety, as you mentioned earlier, from Commonwealth writing, etc., etc. So there may be a foreign name, but if it's known as being part of the of writing in English, it's a kind of different case. I don't know. It really depends. I'm not sure whether simply a foreign name puts people off.
Does anyone else have a... Jim? I mean, also, it might be to do with the way it's differently marketed, how difficult it is to market. Go on.
Hooray, we have a publisher here. I always complain that not enough publishers come to this centre, so...
I think it's worth remembering that...
Introduce yourself.
I'm Jim from Common Press. Publishers also have to sell... Well, they have to sell a book twice, essentially. Firstly, to booksellers who buy in the stock and get it in the shop, and then they're selling to readers. And, for booksellers to buy in stock, I do wonder if they're put off by translated literature, unless it's a Me Too book. So unless you're saying on the AI sheet, the advanced information sheet that goes out to them, this is the next Stieg Larsson, or this is the next Orhan Pamuk, and it's something that they can understand and recognise. I don't know if they know what to do with it and how to sell it. I'm not saying all the blame goes with them, but it's difficult for publishers because it's not just a conversation directly with your readers, but also with all the other people in the industry who help make it happen.
How can we circumvent them?
Well, yeah, I think, and somebody mentioned earlier on something about there's I can't remember which panel, the next Stieg Larsson or whatever, that if you're looking for that, you're only ever going to get an imitation. You're not going to get some brand new phenomenon, and it's really important to not be that's like a way of playing safe. But I mean, I think that's such an important point. And when we were researching the Arabic to English translation report, I kind of realised that some people thought it was like Arabic translated literature that was at fault, and these weird names, but actually that it came out that it really was translated literature in general that it was hard to convince the booksellers about, and so on. And an interesting anecdote from that is that some people will be familiar with the Beirut 39 initiative, and Bloomsbury did an anthology of these. So it's this project of having 39 writers under 40 from a certain area, and Bloomsbury. I don't know if there's anyone from Bloomsbury here, but sorry to say this,
from Hay Festival.
Sorry, yeah,
but from Hay Festival.
But Bloomsbury, who obviously are kind of known for having Harry Potter on their books, actually applied for and got funding to help with the marketing of that book, which I think, maybe some small independent, grant-dependent publishers felt a bit peeved about. But when I interviewed Bloomsbury about that, and they described this process of making, I can't remember what it's called, the kind of pamphlet that you give to booksellers. Huh? No, there's a special word for it, like a showware or something. Anyway,
I don't
it's
know.
like a little taster thing, glossy, nice, beautiful thing that you can show, like a mini version of the book. And the lengths they had to go to convince people, and this is a nice, expensive product so that they were really having to work that hard to convince people even of that. Then,
Yeah.
anyhow, any more on that topic? Or any other topic or questions? If you have the microphone. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm Stephen Watts. I'm a poet. I understand the real importance, and it's vital in a sense to get accurate statistics and to know if and why not. But as a reader, I'm a bit troubled by the national boundary of it a little bit, because I know, and this may be very personal to me, I don't know about everybody else in the room, in the stand, but I know that if I'm interested in reading translated poetry, and I read a huge amount of it, I will look for books that are published all over the world. I will find books that have been published in North America, that have been published in India, that have been published in Romania in English or whatever. And I'm only, that's only one tiny individual. But in terms of reading, and therefore the reading spreads out like ripples from each individual and goes back and forth, then it's not really, just in terms of me, it's not relevant entirely, or it's not an accurate statistic as to what is simply published in this country in translation, even though it is a vital thing to establish in many senses. Because surely reading is a literature without frontiers, isn't it? So.
Not to everyone,
well,
I would say.
Yeah.
But
I know, but the pure act of reading is actually, it's an act of going entirely beyond frontiers. So
I would
think
love to
it
agree
is.
with you, but in a way what you're saying is what publishers are saying when they talk about why they don't take on foreign titles. They say what we're looking for really is a good book. But are they? What are they really looking for? Are they looking for the latest fad? Are they looking for... earlier we had a discussion here about reporting the news, and Marilyn Booth, translator from Arabic, said that she would love to get a publisher interested in a book, in a novel, which is about the rebuilding of Beirut. Now, no one's interested about that. No one's interested in that particular topic. It's the Arab Spring. That's what she said. I don't know whether that necessarily is true. So I think that's part of the problem, that because what you seem to be saying echoes what publishers are saying. We are only looking for good books.
I thought I was saying something entirely different from what publishers are saying, but
yeah,
okay.
I don't know how many languages you read, but if you want to read, if you are a person who relies on English mostly, then...
No, you were talking about books in English, weren't you?
Talking about books in translation, absolutely.
Can I come back to that? I just... I feel like it's quite important to flag up that we are sitting here in a very elite group of people, but because we're all inside this book fair. So most of the people in this audience are in the book industry in some way, and if you're not, then you've paid to come in to think about books here on a work day, which doesn't make you the mass either. So let's assume that we are not representing in any way the mass of the reading public. And I know that's kind of a laboured point, but it reminds me of that same session actually when we were talking in English with English-speaking Egyptians about the English language narrative of the Arab Spring, or Nakba, whatever you want to call it at the moment, the failing revolutions, the bloody revolutions. So wondering really like how we can keep a grip on thinking about actually mass consumption. I mean, okay, reading isn't a mass activity anymore anyway, but just to sort of keep that, I guess, in mind. And then the other thing is, to really keep in mind the commercial imperative, the limit that is put on, I think, publishers' choices. But sorry, going back to what I was just saying, I was thinking that sounds amazing, what you do of searching out. But it really doesn't sound like a mass activity to me, even less than reading being. I mean, how many? Maybe we can have a quick show of hands. But like, how many people have searched out online a book translated from another language into English that turned out to have been published in a country other than England or America? Because I don't think I have, for example, and I'm a translator and I work in this industry. So is that something that other people will be familiar with? Because maybe you're doing more of a wonderful niche activity than you realise there. I can't hear you.
Sorry.
I can't hear you.
Microphone. Can we have the microphone?
Could we have the mic?
Yeah.
Does anybody? Can we do a quick show of hands? Does anyone remember doing that? You do? Oh, so there's a few people. Yeah.
Well, that's something that we should also point out, that of course English language publishing does not happen only in the UK and in the US. It of course happens in Canada and Australia, etc., but also in India. And I have actually encountered interesting examples of Indian publishers picking up titles which they translated into English. So you have this English translation that's published in India and may never be, distributed in the UK, for example. So that's an interesting case. I'm not saying it happens very often. There's another type of activity worth mentioning, and this is publishing in English translation in the country of origin. And this is a kind of debatable activity, because sometimes these translations are not published in very good English, but there are lots and lots of books out there that have been translated from Hungarian, for example, into English and published in Hungary. And actually some statistics show that translation into English, which is from Hungarian into English, is like the second most common activity in terms of publishing in Hungary, which is amazing. So there's this host of books, and we discussed this with some organizations and publishers. Could we maybe harness this publishing and make it available here? Yeah, it's a wide field.
I wonder, I mean, coming back to our focus of world literature here in the UK, and which you just did, I wonder to what extent people feel that new media and online media, and possibly online publishing too, could be changing, because it's kind of too early to tell, but anecdotally, a lot of publishers that we interview talk about how important blogs are to them in terms of spreading the word about books. And when you were saying, Stephen, is it? When you were saying about the ripple, person-to-person reading, there's some blogs with really big followings now about books, and blogs didn't exist 10 years ago, did they really? So I wonder whether that might be partly to do with this buzz, and how far we might be able to expect that to go. Because traditional media isn't really giving any more attention to translation in any serious capacity than it ever did. But I wonder if we're just seeing the beginning of this translation revolution online. You never know. I wonder if anyone... Could you just get the mic? Can we have the mic, please?
Yeah.
Here, sorry. Yeah, you need to put your hand up when you want to start talking.
When the literature is in the marginalized position, in such cases, would you like to translate such kind of literature, and what factors just influence during the process of the translation?
What factors influence the process of translation?
When a certain kind of the literature is in the decentered position or marginalized position, in that situation, usually would you like to translate that kind of literature, and what factor would you influence in the process of your translation?
I didn't fully get. I can't hear very well from here with the speaker. What factors influence being able to translate a literature that's in a marginalized position?
For example, maybe in a certain period of time, maybe the science and technology translation are just quite popular. In that case, the literature is just in the marginalized position. academic sense, just not in the centered position, but in the marginalized position.
I think literary translation in this country will probably always be in some kind of marginalized position. But I don't know if that's your question. Sorry. I mean it is very much.
You mean in UK the literature always in the marginalized position?
No, in the UK situation that we're talking about, the UK market. I don't know if I'm getting your question.
Oh yeah, because in China sometimes literature it's very important in certain period of time. It's just in the centered position, but it's sometimes just in the very not is very important. So I don't know in UK. In UK the literature always in the not in the centered.
It's a very unique position here in the UK. I should have maybe touched on that more clearly earlier on. I mean, we take for granted that everyone knows that in the UK there's a tiny amount of literary translation compared to anywhere else, well, other than America. Because of the language, because there's so much of everything in English if you want it. Does that answer you?
Okay, thank you.
Any more? Someone say something controversial or criticise us.
Yes.
Go on. Tell us where we're going wrong or what we need to look at. What do you want to be answered by this research?
I don't know if this is an unusual comment or something, but I mean, I think it all goes back to the lack of language skills. I mean, I'm just wondering now. I'm an Italian translator, so I come from a completely different situation.
Yeah.
But I mean, how much does the publisher? How much is the publisher responsible for that? I mean, how can you decide to translate and publish a work if you don't have access to the original language? I mean, apart from obviously the difficulty of selling books and convincing the reader to sell to buy a book, obviously the publisher also has the responsibility to find good quality work. And I mean, if they can't if they don't have access to the language, that's not going to happen. So I mean, I think one part of it is also the responsibility of publishers of not being open to world literature.
Sure. I mean, sure, for sure. That's often flagged up, and I mean, but you know, in that case, is it their responsibility or it's a wider cultural thing too, right? Like, it's not like these stupid individuals that didn't learn language. I mean, it's very There's that definitely to take into account. We don't learn languages. We don't speak languages in general.
And again, this is actually one of the questions we asked in the survey, which was answered by 70 publishers. It's not a big sample, but it gives you an idea from across Europe, including publishers in the UK. So what we asked was, how do you select a title, and what actually influences your decision? And there were all sorts of possibilities, like the title has been it has been recommended to you by a national organization that promotes literature. It has been recommended by an agent. It has been recommended by another publisher, because we know that publishers rely a lot on just sort of word of mouth and the professional networks and hearing about a good book, but also whether the book has been translated into other languages. And this is obviously something that does play a role. And it was also something that was discussed in this earlier panel that we had here on Monday, that if you have a book which is promoted and it says this book has been translated into Albanian, does it really matter? Or is it really that publishers are looking kind of for the safe option of publishing something that's already been translated and has done well in Germany, France, Spain, etc.? So, yeah.
We've got a question over here and probably a couple more questions before we wrap up.
This is kind of a question, but it seems like one aspect of this also is the long-range development of readers and what children are reading in schools. And there tends to be a division between world literature and English literature, which really is quite unnatural. And if children were reading things in translation right from the beginning, and
Yeah.
it was fed to them as a translation, and it's normal to read it. Perhaps we would have different attitudes toward what we read in translation. So
I
it'd be
couldn't agree more with what you said, but this is part of the problem, yes.
And,
Yeah.
well, it seems like it would be, a kind of a smart thing to do something
and
about
there's a
it.
discussion tomorrow. I think there's a discussion on about books for children published in translation. So
Question
We'll
over
hear
there.
more
The flip
about
side
that.
of that, of course, is that that also contributes to the invisibility of the translator, which is another big topic, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
the kids are given, I don't know, Garcia Marquez, and they don't even realise that it came from Spanish. Go on.
Well, hello. My name is Richard Ed, and I have written a book in English, and I want to translate it in German. And I think it's also, you have to realize if it's the market for it, because maybe that group of people or that culture may not be interested in it. And the second is, I think if publishers can be more work along with the translators or the people that are writing the books who work so hard, to let them know what they're looking for, and if you're more clear, then I think that helps to motivate the author and also with the publishers, and then we get more books, and maybe more people want to read them.
Well, relying on the advice of translators is something that publishers also do, and I think that's a wise thing to do, because the translator knows both the literature they translate and they know the market of the target language. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Hello, I'm a translator, I'm Greek, and I would say in Greece we had the reverse problem. We were always very open to foreign literature. I would say publishers publish more foreign literature than Greek. When I was growing up, it was more common for me to read Dostoevsky than a Greek writer. And I know publishers who read the original before they publish it. They speak the language. Most of my generation are trilingual, if not more, if not speaking more languages. And I was in the panel this morning that there was a discussion about translation again here, and I felt the distinction between the world and England. I feel I've been living here for a year, but I've been visiting for many more years. And I feel that anything that is not English feels very exotic. However, I've had the chance to read more foreign literature books here. I mean, I have 2 foreign literature books in my bag. One is French, the other is Austrian. I've read a book by a Croatian writer that was published. I feel there are a lot of opportunities to discover foreign literature here. However, it is cloaked with the sense of the exotic that makes an average reader, I would say, feel alienated from the rest of Europe. And there's a lot of great literature out there, and I have to agree with anyone who talked here today about how a story is a story, and if it grips you, it does. Doesn't matter where the writer is from. He can be from anywhere, and literature is universal, and we're all humans, so that's the bottom line. However, in Greece, for example, the National Book Center does a survey every year that publishes statistics about the exact number of titles published in foreign literature and the languages.
That's our point, really.
And the separate literature and the separate languages.
That's what's missing. That's what's always been missing here, and that's probably part of the whole that island insularity that you've identified.
Ideally for me, if you read a book by a Croatian or a Russian or an Argentinian, and that inspires you to learn the language, that's ideal for me. And that's the whole point of literature. I mean, I learned Spanish to read Lorca. I was 22 when I learned Spanish, and I still had the courage for it. I don't know if I do anymore, but what I mean is that you can get inspired, and from my experience here and from what I've seen, the English feel intimidated by foreign languages, and you shouldn't be, really. So,
thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're out of time.
I think we have to stop here because we have we have exactly 1 minute. So thank you very much for coming here and for the interesting discussion. We're here for another day, so you're most welcome to find us either here or at the stand behind me. And
tell us all the
thanks
rest of your
again.
comments.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks.